Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Oakland. Please imagine that you're entering the large oak doors of a graceful old red brick building in downtown Oakland. You go through a foyer with an enormous sanctuary in front of you, an immense vaulted roof like an upside down ship. There are radiant stained glass windows and one very large one at the front, a huge circular stained glass window of the sower. Inside, you join a group of people who strongly believe in the dignity and worth of every person and in the interconnectedness of all life, of justice, and people who celebrate different cultures and races, sexual orientations, and ages. This is the First Unitarian Church of Oakland. And though we can't go there physically, this place exists in our hearts, and I'm grateful that we can be there together today. Our worship leader today is Ian Hill, and I'm Corliss Smith, worship associate. Ian will now lead us in the chalice lighting.
So the words will be on the screen, and I'm going to do something a little different and ask if there is someone who might be willing to read the words, to unmute themselves and read the words as I light the chalice. Is there anyone who might volunteer? And I will call on you if you raise your hand or give some kind of sign that you might be willing to do that. I see Janet McFarland. Hi, Janet. Please do go ahead and unmute, and if you would read the words.
I will do that. Let's see, it says, chalice lighting words. In these hard times, let us look first to the response of love. In the midst of challenge, may our chalice flame bear witness to the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. In the midst of uncertainty, may our chalice be a beacon of encouragement, that our values may guide our choices. Let us always look first to the response of love. Those are words from Maureen Killeran.
Thank you so much, Janet. And if there might be someone else who will read the words of our Black Lives Matter candle, let me see if can make sure I can see folks if they might raise their hand. Oh, I saw Emily, did I see you raise your hand? Please do unmute yourself.
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay. We light this candle in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and work for the day in which Black lives are treated equitably with dignity and justice.
Thank you so much. And now we'll have our first song.
Love is here
I'm going to start this morning with a reading that addresses our subject, which is compassion. As far as I go, wisdom-wise, Pema Chodron is right up there with the best of them. So this is from her work, When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times. Widening the circle of compassion. When we talk of compassion, we usually mean working with those less fortunate than ourselves. Because we have better opportunities, a good education, and good health, we should be compassionate towards those poor people who don't have any of that. However, in working with the teachings on how to awaken compassion and in trying to help others, we might come to realize that compassionate action involves working with ourselves as much as working with others. To relate with others compassionately is a challenge. Really communicating to the heart and being there for someone else, our child, spouse, parent, client, patient, or the homeless woman on the street, means not shutting down on that person, which means, first of all, not shutting down on ourselves. This means allowing ourselves to feel what we feel and not pushing it away. It means accepting every aspect of ourselves, even the parts we don't like. Only in an open, non-judgmental space can we acknowledge what we are feeling. Only in an open space where we're not all caught up in our own version of reality can we see and hear and feel who others really are, which allows us to be with them and communicate with them properly. It's difficult to hear that what we reject out there is what we reject in ourselves, and what we reject in ourselves is what we are going to reject out there. But that, in a nutshell, is how it works. If we find ourselves unworkable and give up on ourselves, then we'll find others unworkable and give up on them. What we hate in ourselves, we'll hate in others. To the degree that we have compassion for ourselves, we will also have compassion for others. Having compassion starts and ends with having compassion for all those unwanted parts of ourselves, all those imperfections that we don't even want to look at. In each of us, there's a lot of softness, a lot of heart. Touching that soft spot has to be the starting place. This is what compassion is all about. When we stop blaming long enough to give ourselves an open space in which to feel our soft spot, it's as if we're reaching down to touch a large wound that lies right underneath the protective shell that blaming builds. Words such as compassion don't mean much until we start cultivating our innate ability to be there with pain, with an open heart, and the willingness not to instantly try to get ground under our feet. How do I communicate so that things that seem frozen, unworkable, and eternally aggressive begin to soften up and some kind of compassionate exchange begins to happen? Well, it starts with being willing to feel that what we are going through. It starts with being willing to have a compassionate relationship with the parts of ourselves that we feel are not worthy of existing on this planet. If we are willing, through meditation, to be mindful, not only of what feels comfortable, but also of what pain feels like, if we even aspire to stay awake and open to what we're feeling, to recognize and acknowledge it as best we can in each moment, then something begins to change. Compassionate action, being there for others, being able to act and speak in a way that communicates, starts with seeing ourselves when we start to make ourselves right or make ourselves wrong. At that particular point, we could just contemplate the fact that there is a larger alternative to either of those, a more tender, shaky kind of place where we could live, This place, if we can touch it, will help us train ourselves throughout our lives to open further to whatever we feel. This place, if we can touch it, will help us train ourselves throughout our lives to open further to whatever we feel, to open further rather than shut down. We'll find that as we begin to commit ourselves to this practice, as we begin to have a sense of celebrating the aspects of ourselves that we found so impossible before, something will shift in us. Something will shift permanently in us. Our ancient habitual patterns will begin to soften, and we'll begin to see the faces and hear the words of people who are talking to us. If we begin to get in touch with whatever we feel with some kind of kindness, our protective shells will melt, and we'll find that more areas of our lives are workable. As we learn to have compassion for ourselves, the circle of compassion for others, what and whom we can work with and how, becomes wider. Now some music.
What wondrous love is this, O my soul, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, O my soul? What wondrous love is this that gives my heart such bliss and takes away the pain of my soul, and takes away the pain of my soul. When I was sinking down, when I was sinking down, when I was sinking down beneath my sorrow's crown, friends to me gathered round, oh my soul, friends to me gathered round, oh my soul. To love and to all friends I will sing, to love and to all friends I will sing, to love and to all friends who pain and sorrow mend, with thanks unto the end I will sing, with thanks unto the end I will sing.
And now if we can prepare ourselves for an embracing meditation. I will, as the screen comes up, I'll share that this embracing meditation comes from the Book of Blessings by Athena Pararakis. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing her name correctly. And what I'd like for us to do is to repeat the words on the screen with each other. And it's okay that it sounds like a cacophonous bunch of words, but they are: I love and accept myself today and extend that gracious acceptance
to others.
I grow and expand
every day.
a model
of love for others, radiating. Okay. Say the names of
And
those you
now,
wish to send love to.
Of all those you wish.
I want to send love to my cousin
My
Doug,
mother,
because he's
Shebra
9.
Hill,
my son,
Tessa
To
Anderson,
baby Elena, who turned 1 year
my
old
Brother-in-law
yesterday,
Nick, my
and my
sister
sister,
Judy,
yes,
and my
and
friend
my
Yaska,
my
sister-in-law,
sister Sarah,
Deanna, she turned 60 yesterday.
Charlie and Zach,
oh, yes, as
Auntie
always.
Penny, Polly.
To Liz and Dark, who are going to have a baby girl in January. Uh-huh.
What are they gonna name?
We don't know. We don't know until she gets here. For the people, for the inmates in Santa Rita.
And now let us take a moment in silence to just sit and allow love and all the words to sink in. Always remember, you are loved. Thank you.
Earlier,
And yes.
did I jump on you, Ian?
No, I was just going to introduce you, please.
Oh. Okay. Earlier, I spoke of entering an imaginary building. Oh, how we love it. And though we're not there, it still needs us, as do the people who work there. Stefan has put the third coat of varnish on the big oak doors, and there are more coats to come. But usually part of the nourishment that keeps the church going, functioning, comes from rentals, which we just don't have right now. So we ask that you be as generous as you can, even beyond your pledge. And we thank you so much. Here's a short video to show how to contribute.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night.
Growing in love with you, each of you. I can remember the exact moment I first encountered Unitarian Universalism. It was October 2013. I was still in the Air Force, stationed in South Korea. There were no UU churches anywhere near my military base, and I didn't know any UU chaplains. I found our denomination through a Google search after waking up from a vivid dream that depicted me as a minister. At the time, I thought it was absolutely absurd. My spirituality was something I thought to be a weird mashup of Buddhism, witchcraft, ancestor reverence, and a splash of Christianity. I Googled a string of those terms, followed by the word church and queer. And somewhere after page 5 or so, I came across a blog post with someone with an identity very similar to mine talking about their Unitarian Universalist fellowship. It was love at first sight. And by sight, I mean the one spelled S-I-T-E as in website. I came to Unitarian Universalism via the online church of the larger fellowship. For those who are unfamiliar with the CLF, let me tell you, it is a virtual community that has bits of everything that makes UU as dynamic as it is. They had ministries centering experiences of people of color, LGBTQ folks, young adults, people in prison, people in the military, UU Buddhist, pagan, Christian, and so much more. Now, I don't know if CLF still offers all of these ministries, but at the time, I felt like I hit spiritual jackpot. I fell head over heels in love with this faith. Let me ask, do any of you remember falling in love for the very first time? Can you recall the feeling of intoxicatingly powerful excitement, overwhelming happiness? I felt all of these things in finding a faith that accepted all facets of my identity. The UU principles led me to believe that this religious community would love all of me, and it was as if the sky was suddenly bluer, the grass and trees were greener, and the flowers more lush. Everything around me seemed to come alive with more vibrance than ever before. It may sound crazy, but some have related the feeling of falling in love, even with the community, to the high of taking some kind of drug. In fact, an article in Psychology Today said, quote, now this is what they said, not me, falling in love is a lot like smoking crack cocaine. Now, I know that that may sound like an extremely strong comparison, but research conducted by anthropologist and relationship researcher, Dr. Helen Fisher, found some interesting results in her studies on how love affects our brain chemistry. According to her findings, feelings of love elicit exceptionally high levels of dopamine and noradrenaline, which are the same chemical compounds activated during a drug-induced high. There is a clear euphoric effect both drugs and being in love exhibits in our bodies. Our hearts know very little difference between an illegal substance and falling in love. I know this is crazy. The stimulation is said to cause one to feel as if they can conquer the world and do anything and be anything. So I share all of this because this is how I felt when I encountered Unitarian Universalism. Like I could do or be anything, even a queer mystic minister. I felt like the faith of UU was so life-saving that it can conquer the entire world. Child, I was so sure of UU's perfection that I basically eloped just after meeting. I literally quit my job and decided to become a UU minister just like that. But then I moved back to the United States from Korea and actually met UUs. I visited about 6 congregations, and my first experience with Unitarian Universalists was much different from my experience of Unitarian Universalism. This is when reality set in. The honeymoon phase of loving something I realized I truly didn't know much about came to an abrupt stop. Without the rose-colored lens of someone love-struck, the flaws and shortcomings of this faith became more and more apparent. I realized that our denomination struggled in the areas of ministry that initially drew me in. Unitarian Universalism was not the anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural community I thought it was. Black, Indigenous, and people of color were a rarity, and I couldn't see myself in our collective reflection. It became a challenge for me to feel love for my faith. This is where the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, author, theologian, civil rights leader, and co-founder of the first major interracial church in the United States, came in. I was on the brink of breaking up with Unitarian Universalism. Then I heard Thurman's lecture series, Growing in Love. The recorded sermons moved successively from topics of loving oneself to loving others to the spirit of love, as some might know as God. It was very similar to the reading that Corliss shared earlier by Pema Chodron that talked about how loving oneself allowed us to more easily love others, which then circled back to loving the idea of love or God in itself. I listened to this series over and over and felt like Thurman became my relationship therapist, mending me and you back together. Listening to Dr. Thurman, I settled into his position of not being kept from loving others in the same way that I would not be kept from loving myself. He taught that just as self-love means to deal with myself beyond all limitations, to look past all of my own shortcomings and see my inner likeness to the divine, loving others is done in the same way. If I genuinely wanted to participate in the building of beloved community, I would have to be willing to deal with individual yous. Before I could extend love to the collective Unitarian Universalist faith or to the global community beyond this faith, I had to first come to love more deeply myself and individual Unitarian Universalists. The more compassionate I could be with my own faults or areas of ignorance, the more compassionate I could be towards the faults of people in my community. In growing to be more able to look beyond the surface imperfections of both myself and those of others, I could become more capable of connecting with our shared center, our mutual likeness to the divine. This is what it means to grow in love, to detach from the superficial attractions that might have initially drawn one in, instead to look for the image of divine love that lives within all beings. That inner place of sacred and shared connection that exists beyond what eyes can see. This is where loving others is really an exercise of loving oneself more deeply. I found that we can only search for the image of God or divine or love in each other as we understand or have seen it in ourselves. Growing with one another requires more than seeing a reflection of ourselves within each other, but actually finding that part of us that lives in one another. That real yet elusive part of us that unites us to the interdependent web of existence we believe in. It's the part of us that asks, how can I be happy if my sibling is in misery? How can I be free while my kin is still enslaved? I believe many of us feel this kind of connection to each other. And I also believe that there are certain evils that strive to sever this bond, or at least make us think that this connection doesn't exist. When I thought I couldn't love my community of faith because of its issues with racism or cultural incompetence, this is what I would call an evil that sought to sever our bond. Thurman preached that certain nefarious forces cut folks off from being able to love one another. He said that while spiritually searching for the part of self that lives in others, one must refuse to give power to the energy that strives to separate us from the love that is unconditionally ours. I, like Thurman, refuse to let white supremacy separate me from loving my faith community. Only by confronting and challenging the source of tension can spiritual transformations truly occur. Only by dealing with individual hurts from a place of compassion can we actually grow in love collectively. Growing in love with you I learned when you grow to love, it rarely begins with passion or love at first sight. It is not drug-like at all. It is a journey with uncomfortable twists and turns. It's laughing, crying, and everything in between. It's knowing that you are safe, being yourself, and most importantly, understood and accepted. It's being held in a sense of security, trusting that love is strong enough to weather emotional storms. You start on the ground and begin in the soil you fertilize with water and foster with sunlight. And gradually with time, nurture, care, real effort and work, love begins to grow. It starts as a seed, then it grows and then blossoms. This was the experience I found in you, First Unitarian Church of Oakland. I didn't have the opportunity to express this before I moved away, and I wanted all of you to know. My time at First Unitarian Church of Oakland was not without its challenges, but between worshiping with all of you and the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism community, I was able to land safely from my fall in love and begin real growth loving this faith. Thank you. I sincerely appreciate each of you and feel extremely grateful for the love between us that continues to nourish my spirit and hopefully enhances yours. Be blessed and know that you are a blessing to this community and to the world at large. And keep faith, knowing love always wins.
We've come to the end of our service. We're so glad to have Ian with us today. If there's anything good to come out of the COVID, it's the fact that we can have people from Tallahassee, Florida, being in our services. May you have a peaceful week. May you have a peaceful interaction with yourself. And bless you all. May it be so.